You know those moments in a story that just lodge themselves in your brain? The ones you can't shake, even years later? Well, chances are that moment had a major sacrifice at its core. Today, we're going to break down why sacrifice is pretty much the ultimate weapon for storytellers. Let's get into it. See, a sacrifice in a story isn't just a sad thing that happens. The source material for this has a great name for it, a rupture moment. It's this point where a character does something that completely shatters the normal logic of the story, and in that moment, it stops being just a story and becomes something intensely human. So that brings us to the big question for this explainer, right? Why is literally breaking your own story's rules the absolute best way to make it unforgettable? Well, let's figure that out.
To really get it, we have to look under the hood. We need to understand the forces that are clashing with each other when a character decides to make that final, ultimate sacrifice.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting. Any real sacrifice is basically a three-way tug of war happening inside a character. You've got that primal biological drive to survive, then you have the deeply human need for life to have meaning, and then there's that third thing, that drive to go beyond yourself, which could be love or faith, or maybe even a little bit of madness. And there is no better example of this rupture moment in action than Sidney Carton from Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities. I mean, his story is the masterclass in how one single act of sacrifice can completely change everything. For basically the entire book, Carton is this aimless, broken, kind of self-destructive guy, an anti-hero for sure. But his final sacrifice, it doesn't just end his story. It totally rewrites who he was all along, transforming him into someone with meaning, someone redefined, someone heroic. But here's the wild part. His sacrifice does so much more than just wrap up his own story. It has three, honestly, mind-blowing effects on the entire structure of the novel. First, it makes you reread the whole book in your head. Suddenly, all his weird, vague behavior from earlier chapters just clicks. It all makes sense now. Second, it's the ultimate character arc completion. The anti-hero becomes the hero. And third, it takes love from just being an emotion and turns it into this huge philosophical idea, something actually worth dying for. Okay, so that's the classic heroic sacrifice. But let's zoom out a bit, because that's not the only kind. Myth and tragedy show us that sacrifice can be way more complicated, and sometimes a whole lot darker. Just think of Prometheus. He stole fire for humanity, knowing full well the gods would torture him for eternity. That wasn't about love. That was pure philosophical rebellion against the way the universe was set up. It was a cosmic act of defiance. And then you have the gut-wrenching story of Iphigenia. Her own father sacrifices her just to get the winds to blow for his warships. In her case, sacrifice isn't heroic at all. It's manipulation. She's a victim, and her death is just a tool to make powerful men even more powerful. And with Antigone, we see sacrifice as a form of political resistance. She breaks the king's law to bury her brother, and she knows it's a death sentence. She's using her own life as the ultimate protest against a state she sees as unjust. So, what happens when we get to the modern world? What happens to the whole idea of sacrifice when the world itself starts to feel like it's lost meaning? When those grand narratives and cosmic certainties fade away? Well, you see this sort of de-evolution. In the old myths, a sacrifice could literally change the cosmos. In tragedies, it was all about fulfilling a grand destiny. But in a lot of modern stories, the sacrifice makes no difference at all. And that's its own special kind of tragedy. And nobody, I mean nobody, captured this better than Kafka. In his world, people are sacrificed to these giant, faceless, bureaucratic systems. No one sees it happen. Nothing changes because of it. And that kind of quiet, meaningless sacrifice might just be the most painful kind a writer can create. You can see this idea echoed in what we might call today's gray sacrifices. These are the quieter, more ambiguous acts we see all the time. The whistleblower, who gives up their whole career just to get the truth out. The protester, who puts their own safety on the line. The focus isn't on some grand cosmic heroism anymore. It's on the very real, very personal cost of what you believe in. So after all that, the heroic, the tragic, the modern, the absurd, we gotta come back to us, the people watching the story. Why does this hit us so hard every single time? Because sacrifice slams us right into the central paradox of being human. Why on earth would anyone choose to act against their most powerful, biological, hardwired instinct, survival? There's no easy answer to that, and that's exactly why we can't look away.
You see, when we watch a character make that choice, the story is secretly putting us on trial. It's whispering these huge, terrifying questions in our ear. What is a life really worth? Is there anything you would die for? Is love or truth or justice actually more important than just staying alive?
So let's pull all these threads together for one last big idea, the thing that really makes this storytelling tool so powerful. At the end of the day, sacrifice is the exact moment a story transforms. It stops being about a sequence of events, about what happens next, and it becomes a deep dive into why any of this matters. Sacrifice is the engine that creates meaning. Which kind of leaves us with one final thought, doesn't it? If a story can create one single moment that's so powerful it makes you question the value of everything you thought you knew, well, hasn't that story already won?